Okay, I think we can get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our live stream. My name is Yvette Morataya. I'm the Outreach Director for Informed Immigrant. For those that might be joining us for the first time, Informed Immigrant is an online platform created specifically for the immigrant community to find resources to stay informed and therefore feel empowered. So you can find us on informedimmigrant.com or inmigrantinformado.com. Some of the resources that you can find on there vary between family preparedness plans, policy updates, where you can find organizations, a few free mental health resources. So really just a lot, again, created for the immigrant community to stay informed. So today's conversation is going to be centered around Black immigrants and mental health. I do want to remind folks that towards the very end of this, we will take a few questions, but we won't be answering any personal questions. And this conversation is not meant to substitute seeking out a professional therapist. If you feel like you need to speak to someone, we encourage you to find resources online or find someone that you can speak to. I do want to thank Catherine again for joining us. She's with us today from the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. Catherine, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do with BAJI?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine Labiran. I'm BAJI's Gender Justice Program Coordinator. My background is that I'm Nigerian. I was born in New York and raised in London. I'm currently living in New York, but this second I'm in London, so definitely always moving back and forth. And of course, migration is something that's dear to my heart through my own personal experiences, but then also through working at BAJI and thinking about the experiences of Black immigrant women, of femmes, of non-binary and trans people, and just how this intersection of gender, migration, race, and sexuality play out. And of course, mental health is something that I think is a crucial topic for us to continuously explore. And 2020 has been a time where people have really been made to think about the pandemic, uprisings, the elections, and how all of these different societal issues and experiences have impacted how we see ourselves and our wellness.
Yeah, which is why we think it's so important to talk about everything that we're going to cover today. But Catherine, you mentioned we're in the middle of a pandemic. We just witnessed one of the largest national movements calling for racial justice in the summer. We just finished one stressful election. So what would you say to people who have a lot on the line?
Yeah, I would say that, it's so important for you to know that your feelings are valid, whether you're experiencing feelings of joy and reassurance, or if you're feeling it's feelings of grief, sadness, isolation. I think when it comes to the elections, for many people, we can say that the outcome was favorable. But for Black immigrants, we understand that we're still going to have to fight. There's still things that we need to do. We still need to organize. We still need to get our communities together in order for us to actually push towards liberation. So I think we need to really grapple with the fatigue that we've experienced this year, especially as it came to the uprisings and we were forced to see Black death on our screens and had to really reckon with the rampant racism and xenophobia in this country. And now for many of us, we are considering this time that we have right now as a break, which is awkward to say because we're still under fatigue, but we are apprehensive of what the inauguration is going to look like. We're apprehensive of, the bailout work that's going to have to be done in January. So this moment that we have right here is crucial for us to really think about our communities, like how can we be close to people? We understand that the pandemic has really negatively impacted that, but even thinking about just, scheduling phone calls, scheduling walks, scheduling time to just even speak with our neighbors, scheduling time to speak to our elders as well, because we still need to remember them in this season. So I think we really have to think strategically about mental health right now and just think about all the different ways that we can care for people outside of mental health as well, whether it's physical health. COVID is still a huge issue that our communities are experiencing, and also thinking about spiritual health as well for people who are spiritually inclined in that way.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning a few options of how folks should deal with this moment and how valid a lot of the feelings that folks are feeling, because like you mentioned, there's no certainty going into the new administration of like how things might go or what things might look like, but You mentioned Black immigrants and what their experience is like, and I want to acknowledge, like, when people think about immigration, they instantly think about the non-Black Latino community. They don't think about Black immigrants, and we've learned time and time again that immigration is actually very diverse, but it plays out differently when it comes to Black immigrants because they're disproportionately impacted when it comes to discrimination, detentions, and deportations. But can you tell us a little bit about how all of this is playing out in the immigrant community?
Yeah, I think that we can definitely say that Black immigrant experiences are continuously invisibilized. And we see that, especially when we look at the US Mexico border and just how reporting is there and the experiences of African immigrants, for example, in detention. We rarely see that on our TV screens or in newspapers. And even when we think about, for example, people who are fighting for language justice, whether that's in hospitals, for example, a lot of people only push for particular languages to be used in terms of interpretation and translation. But if we're really being inclusive of Black immigrants, then we should also be having interpretation and translation into African languages so that everyone can be seen and catered to. And also within the medical arena, we see how doctors invisibilize Black immigrants through not even like digging into people's medical histories, asking people, have you experienced things like female genital cutting, for example, before they begin gynecological procedures that could really traumatize people. So it's really this holistic understanding of people's experiences, understanding that Black people, have various points of origin, various points and experiences and stories that really need to be digged into in order to care for Black immigrants and see that Black immigrants truly exist and that our experiences and voices are valid. I think we also see within the immigration space that there's this binary between good immigrants and bad immigrants. So good immigrants are classed as immigrants who work extremely hard, who maybe pull themselves up by their bootstraps, who aren't lazy and who aren't criminals. But then bad immigrants are seen as lazy immigrants, who have a criminal record. And there's this conflation between the word Black and bad. And we've seen that throughout history, but it also exists in the present day. So we see that there are non-Black immigrants who would believe that they have a greater stake in the US than Black immigrants. And that, of course, erodes the solidarity that we're trying to build within immigrant communities.
Yeah, there's definitely a lack of coverage or knowledge when it comes to how differently Black immigrants are being impacted. And like you mentioned, the lack of resources when it comes to language or even accessibility to legal counsel or fees when it comes to paying out bail and just everything that has to do with immigration that is already so complicated and how much harder it's being built out for the Black immigrants that are coming into the country, specifically asylum seekers. We've seen of horrible tragedy like stories that are coming out about the abuse that they've been receiving inside of detention centers. So I encourage people to follow BAJI and follow other organizations, and all of us as a whole have to do a much better job at covering and speaking about the differences that while still the immigrant communities are experiencing at very different levels. But I do want to go back to the accessibility when it comes to mental health and the resources that might be available specifically for immigrant communities. So can you tell us a little bit about what is available to them?
Sure, there are a number of foundations that I would highlight. They're not specifically just for immigrant communities, but they are definitely resources that immigrants can tap into. So the Loveland Foundation, they have a mental health fund. Currently, the cohort is full, but if you sign up for their newsletter, you'll be notified as soon as the 2021 cohort is open. And they provide 4 therapy sessions complimentary if you're selected for the cohorts. So that's effectively, like, I think $135 for 4 therapy sessions. And they are a wonderful resource just for connecting people to great therapists as well. I'd also recommend Heal House, which is a wellness center in New York. They recently started a mental health fund as well to support people in need. Again, I believe their current cohort is full, but if you sign up for their newsletter, you'll be the first people to know about it. And then also the National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network, they have a mental health fund. So I really encourage people who are able to contribute to that to do so, because they are caring for people who are trans and queer and also, in need of therapy in this time. And then when it comes to people who, of course, lack insurance, I would ask people or advise people to try and reach out to therapists, especially those who have in their bios that they work with immigrants or they work with undocumented people, because although they may have like one price listed on the website, through speaking to you, there's a huge chance that they may be able to negotiate that and lower it for you. So just trying to use directories like Therapy for Black Girls to weed out the kinds of therapists who you believe will be culturally competent and maybe speak your indigenous language and are recommended by other people, and then try and take the conversation from there.
Yeah, thank you for listing out a few directories where folks can go and find, because I know how hard it is to find a therapist that you feel like might be able to talk about your conversations. The only other directory I know, sorry, is because I was going to mention Therapy for Black Girls, but then also Latinx therapy, also has a resource, and a lot of them are trained to deal specifically with immigration. So that would be somewhere else where folks can definitely go take a look. But I did jump over one of our questions that had to do with the research that you do directly that speaks about immigrant mental health when it comes to immigrant women and femmes. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics because it is one of the biggest things that I work on at BAJI is our research. And we decided to focus on the mental health of Black immigrant women and femmes. So we launched this process last summer, and we had 4 research fellows in the cities of New York, Miami, Minneapolis, and LA. And they were tasked with going into their communities just to interview people about their mental health, to have these very informal conversations. And we didn't want it to be a super clinical process where, you're just telling us about maybe depression or anxiety. We wanted to really ground it in people's lived experiences. So how does interactions with ICE, how does that impact how you feel about yourself and see your sense of belonging in the US? Or do you even have a sense of belonging in the US? How does interactions with police or healthcare practitioners or benefits administrators or faith leaders or your family and friends, all of these different people and institutions that we are consistently interacting with, like how is that shaping your understanding of yourself and your people? And do you even have a support system here? Or are you still longing for your support system back home if you still have one? So we were really trying to dig into people's stories. We managed to interview 84 people between the ages of 18 and 84. So it's really rich data. And not only did we want to look at people's challenges, we wanted to look at people's visions. So if money was not an obstacle, what kind of world would you create for yourself and your family and your communities? Like, what are the programs you would like to see? What are the policies that you would like to be changed? So really the report is refreshing to me because it really presents us with this blueprint that if we actually actualize these things, we are taking the leadership of the people who we interviewed, and we are able to transform our realities in that way. So the report will be launched in February 2021. We are extremely excited. It will be digital and it will be printed. So yeah, we'd love to stay in touch with all of you and be able to share it with you once it's out.
Yeah, definitely encourage everyone again to follow BAJI on their social platforms so that we can all see when that report comes out, because it's extremely important to continue having these conversations, and especially when it comes to mental health, just because people always feel some sort of way when we talk about mental health, but specifically when we're talking about mental health in the immigrant community, there's definitely a lack of resources and information when it comes to the immigrant community and just how it impacts them overall. But since we're talking about mental health in the immigrant community and how folks might feel when it comes to talking about it, I want to ask you, how can we address mental health in a community that might see it as a nuisance or a taboo?
Yeah. I think it's by having conversations like this, like conversations in the open and public spaces that allow us to begin the work of destigmatizing some of these mental health topics, and also by meeting people where they're at. In a lot of our research, people are talking about their parents who describe depression in a completely different way, just simply because there isn't that language within their culture to describe depression. But maybe they might say that, I feel really tired. I just keep on sleeping, or they're using other words to describe it, but it's not that they do not understand what it means to be depressed. It's just that there are different nuances and different ways that people convey things. So I want us to just remember the importance of this intergenerational dialogue, that we shouldn't forget youth, we shouldn't forget elders. We need all of us to be engaged in this mental health conversation so that we can transform what it looks like, what intergenerational trauma looks like, how we can turn that into intergenerational healing by having everyone at the table. But I think we just have to continue to be vulnerable with ourselves, you know, outside of these formal conversations, like thinking about within my friendship groups, like, have I checked in with people? Do I know how my friends actually feel? Like, are my friends experiencing seasonal affective disorder? You know, and how is that compounded by the pandemic? You know, just being curious about people's experiences, and even like thinking about our parents. You know, I think for many of us, we forget that our parents are people. we just see them as our parents. But, you know, how is my mum doing at this time? Like, how has she been affected by COVID? Like, what's been on her mind? How has she been impacted by the uprisings? And then thinking about our, you know, intimate relationships, romantic relationships, thinking about, you know, our employees, people that we manage, all of these different dynamics, just having this consistent curiosity, I think, about people. I think that's how we can really think about care and think about making these conversations more public and more vulnerable. But I think that we also need to be good at actively listening to people, to not shaming people when they tell us that they're going through something. You know, especially as Black women, there's all these stereotypes that we have to consistently be strong, consistently hold ourselves together. But, you know, I encourage people to allow people in their communities, including themselves, to fall apart sometimes. Sometimes it's impossible to hold ourselves together. So we have to allow ourselves to crumble. And, you know, my main hope is that as we crumble, that we have people to lean on in that process. That's what community should look like. That's how we should show up for each other. But this insistence that we have to always power through things and continue to work, I think it's a derivative from capitalism and how we are just conditioned to think we always must be doing something and we always must be perfect, and it's impossible. So I think we need to kind of retrain our minds and reconstruct what we think of when we think of wellness and how we want to live and be successful.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned this very last part about how we're all conditioned to just be like on the go and moving and not really like acknowledging our emotions. Because I know that that's definitely something I'm still working on, because everything that we're dealing with right now with the pandemic is just, there's so much uncertainty. And when we've been programmed since we were kids to be expecting like, well, where do you see yourself in 5 years, or where do you see yourself in a year? And then having that like certainty taken away from you puts you in a very different place, and it forces you to sit down and be like, okay, well, how do I feel good and how do I feel productive without it being like checking off a box list or something. And it like forces you to check in with your emotions, and it forces us to check in on our friends too, and the community around us, and have these hard conversations about our emotions and where we're all feeling emotionally. Because like you mentioned, talking to our parents or talking to our families, at least with mine, when I talk about mental health, it's always like, well, no, that's not something I have to talk about. Like mental health is for people who like really need it or they're crazy or something, when in reality it's not like that. It can look very differently. Like you mentioned, it could just be exhaustion or feeling sad all the time, or, you know, different variables. So again, thank you for listing out some of that stuff. I think going into, and still within the same category of this, is like, how can we normalize and be more consistent when it comes to mental health and talking about it without it feeling like it's only during crisis moments?
Yeah, I think it's by like checking in with people when there isn't a crisis. Like before your friend is going to go through, even if it's something like a breakup, right? While they're in the healthiest part of the relationship, asking them, like, how can I show up for you? Like, what does friendship look like for you? What does care look like for you? Because for some people, it might be, I just want you to listen to me. Or some people want advice. Or some people, like, I love acts of service. So I just would love someone to cook for me or help me clean or help me get groceries. You know, there's so many different ways that people want to be cared for. So I think we should really be intentional about finding out how people want to receive care from us, and just doing that on a regular day, just during a check-in with a friend. And I always am very open with telling people that when I signed up for therapy while I was a master's student, it wasn't a very sunny, happy day. I didn't have any crisis or any issue in particular going on in that particular moment, but I wanted to be proactive. I wanted my therapist to get to know me, and I wanted to share as much as I could while I was in this happy state, because I knew life is life. There was always going to be something that was going to happen. So that when I did go in and I was in a crisis mode, this person already knew so much about me that she was able to advise me with ease. So I think it's just really thinking about therapy outside of just like when we are depressed or when we are experiencing anxiety. But for me, my therapist, you know, she really acts in so many different capacities. She acts as someone who encourages me. She's excited for me when I get new opportunities. She celebrates me. She reassures me. She praises me. It's just having this consistent person who isn't like tied to us by blood or by friendship, who's on the outside, who can really just give us that like steering that we need sometimes. So I really just encourage people to just think about how they can use therapy and use like these intimate conversations with their loved ones for their betterment. But it definitely does not need to be in a moment of crisis.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to point out is that therapy is definitely not only for when you're not feeling great, and
Yeah,
that folks can go in there to talk about just about anything. It could be
yeah,
something that you think might not actually be bothering you, and then you deep dive into it and you're like, oh, I didn't know I've been carrying that with me
yeah.
for a really long time. But
Mhm.
therapy is very helpful to kind of comb through your emotions and where you're at, not only in that moment, but where you've been in the past or where you feel like you're heading or like the anxiety that comes with everyday life.
Mhm.
But again, encourage folks that if they're able to, that they, are seek out speaking to someone outside of just their friends. Because sometimes when you talk to your friends or people that know you, you hold back and you don't really
Yeah,
talk about the things that really bother you because there's those emotions of, well, what would they say? What will they think? I don't know that I'll receive the kind of care that I need. And therapists are able to provide that space to discuss some of those emotions.
yeah.
But I think leading into our last questions before we switch into Q&A is how we can approach these conversations in a way that is helpful and healing rather than taking folks into deeper into their sadness or depression, especially when we're talking about these kinds of emotions.
Yeah. I
So
think again, one thing that I ask my friends is like, what are their triggers? What are the things that you do not want to talk about? And I ask this actually repeatedly in the conversations that I have with people. Like, I kind of see myself in many conversations like in the passenger seat, and my friends are the ones driving it, and I'll just be like peeking over to see like where we're going and just making sure that it's where they want us to go. But I'm always there. So I
mhm.
want to be like, as I said, the active listener, but I never want to steer the wheel into a place where the person doesn't want to go. So I think by like using that metaphor, we can act with compassion and still be present with the people that we need to without, basically turning a conversation that should be to their betterment to their detriment. So I think it's just basically gauging where people are and seeing what they need in that time and just making ourselves available and understanding that sometimes people may actually not want to speak. And I think that for many people, that's a hard thing to understand that, does this mean that my friendship is in question? Does that mean I should be angry at them? Does that mean that, I shouldn't be in their lives anymore? But for some people, they just do not know how to verbalize what they're experiencing, especially if they're experiencing something like depression for the first time, which I think many people have this year. So I think we just really need to have grace for people in this time. We need to give people space if they need it, but then, tap in with them and like reassure them that we're still here if they need us.
Yeah, this is definitely a moment, and people should. I don't want to put the responsibility on other people to check in on their friends or anything, but I'm saying that especially right now, a lot of us need community
Mm-hmm.
for those that are at home all the time or are sometimes surrounded by the same person and you just need to speak to somebody else, but like checking in with them to see where they are. I really
Yeah.
like your the metaphor that you used about being in the passenger seat and not
Mm-hmm.
being the one driving, because I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's where some of us might make that mistake of when a friend really needs to lean on you, that you think they want your advice or you think that
Yeah.
they want you to give them the answer when in reality they just want to check in with someone and they want to see if where they're at makes sense or
Mm-hmm.
simply, again, just have somebody listen to them. So I
Yeah.
really like the way that you put that. So friends, we are ending, we're at the very end of our conversation here. Catherine, I do want to give you a second to see if there's anything else that you would like to add, and then we'll switch into Q&A, and then Catherine will be leading us in a quick grounding exercise. So folks, please don't hang up, don't end the call yet for us. But Catherine, was there anything else that you wanted to add before we switch?
No, I'm just enjoying this conversation. I think that, these conversations are always necessary. I'm always happy to do them. And yeah, I'm excited to see if there's anything I can answer for people who are joining us.
Yeah, definitely. Anything that comes with mental health, I get excited because I enjoy when people talk about it, and I
Mhm.
always feel like in vulnerability you can find different answers,
Yeah.
and that's how you're able to connect with people on a very different level. So I'm scrolling through here to see if we have any questions. Okay, we just got one that says, "How can we get involved with your prospective organizations or volunteer opportunities?" Catherine, if you'd like to go first.
Sure. With BAJI, you can just send us an email. Our email is info@baji.org. And if there are particular roles that you see you could play, or skills or expertise that you have, you can let us know that in the email. And if there are opportunities that come up, we'll definitely be sure to respond and let you know about them.
Yeah, and I'll say for Informed Immigrant, we do have a few opportunities every once in a while, but I would say that normally we tend to point people towards organizations that are near them. So I'd encourage you to go onto the platform and see if there's an organization near you by typing in your zip code and seeing if they have opportunities that are closer to you that might need some help. But otherwise, you can always contact us on Instagram or on Facebook, or you can email us on our platform as well. And then I'll just give some time to see if folks have any other questions for you or I. But as I mentioned, mental health is simply just something that a lot of us have to address internally, and then also have conversations with folks around us, especially our friends and family. But well, I think we're not getting any additional questions. So Catherine, would you like to lead us on the grounding exercise? And then if we get another question, then I'll ask you towards the very end.
Sure. Okay, so I'd like for us to just spend a few minutes meditating together. I think for many people, meditation is something that is scary, or it's maybe they've been told before that they've been doing it wrong. But I want you to feel completely comfortable that you're not going to get this wrong. This isn't a test. This is just you taking time out of your, I'm sure, very busy day to center yourself. And I'm going to do all the guiding. You just have to sit there and breathe as deeply as you can. So first, I want us to just kind of get into our bodies. So do whatever feels right to you in order to like shake off tension. I've personally been carrying so much tension in my shoulders. So I'm going to give myself a little shoulder massage my neck, gonna wiggle my feet a bit because I've been sitting in this one position for hours, and I'm gonna wiggle my hands. During the meditation, I want you to feel comfortable smiling, expressing yourself in any way. If tears come, let them come. Every emotion is valid and beautiful, and I want you to allow yourself to experience it in its totality. So as we breathe, as you breathe in, I want you to think of your stomach inflating. So it might be useful to think of a little balloon inflating, or maybe you want to think of a flower and the petals opening. So with the breath in, we inflate, breath out, we take our stomachs in. So let's just practice doing that for a second. And you can keep your eyes closed. Mine will be slightly open, so I can keep an eye on the time. But just allow yourself to breathe in deeply. And out. In, out, in, out. Thinking of the balloon. In, out, in, out, in, out. Keep on breathing. And as we do this, I want you to ensure that your shoulders are slumped. And if there's tension in your face or your jaw, release your jaw. And keep on breathing in and out. In, out. So as we meditate, this is going to be a meditation for protection. So protection is something that we really struggle to, I think of oftentimes because there's so much violence around us. But I want you to try and call the spirit of protection around you just for a few moments. So as I'm speaking, continue to breathe in and out, in and out. So I want you to think of a person or a thing that has provided you with protection. If there's just one thing, I know sometimes it's so hard to think of anything, but if there's one person, a grandparent, a parent, a friend, a partner, or even if it's a thing, a blanket, a teddy bear, your favorite hot chocolate, something that just made you feel protected, visualize it as you breathe in and out. In, out. in and out. In and out. In and out. In and out. If you're imagining a person, what does their presence feel like? If it feels warm, what does the warmth feel like? Allow the warmth to wrap around you. And if you could think of a color for the protection, what color would the protection be? If you had to think of a month of the year that this feeling would fall under, what month would you choose? Breathing in and out. Thinking of the balloon or the flower. Breathing in and out. In and out. In. If you're thinking of a thing, an object, what's the texture of it? Is it soft? Is it thick? How old were you when you first were given or bought this object? If you were given it, who gave it to you? Breathing in and out. In. In. Out. In. Out. Is there weight that you can give to this person that's protecting you? Or to this thing that's protecting you? Is there something that you can leave behind that no longer serves you? Imagine yourself taking that thing off your shoulders or off your back or out of your heart or out of your soul and give it to that person or that thing to carry for you. Breathing in and out. In and out. In. Is this a feeling that you can carry outside of this meditation? Into tomorrow. Breathe in and out. In and out. In and out. Imagine yourself saying thank you to the person or the thing that joined you during this meditation. Express gratitude to them or to the thing and ask them to stick around with you as we go through this very tough season. And breathe in and out. In, out. And when you're ready, you can start bringing yourself back into the room. You can take your time because no one can see you. That's the beauty of Instagram Live. Allow yourself to smile. Allow yourself to stretch and rejoin the space.
Thank you, Catherine, for leading us in that exercise. I know that I definitely needed that, especially going into the evening. But we did get one additional question. If you could repeat the resources or websites that you mentioned earlier in our conversation.
Sure. So in terms of getting support for therapy, the Loveland Foundation, so that's spelled like love, Loveland Foundation. If you sign up for their newsletter, they'll let you know when the next cohort is open. And they provide people with funding for 4 therapy sessions. I'm actually on that cohort right now, so I'm living proof that this is real. You can get funding for therapy. Heal House, which is spelled Heal, Heal, and then space Haus. They're based in New York, and they also provide funding for therapy. Their current cohort is full, but again, sign up for the newsletter because you'll be the first people to know. And then the National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network, they also provide funding via their mental health fund. And then again, as I mentioned, for people who are just interested in just finding a therapist through like directories like Therapy for Black Girls, just try and see if you find a therapist that speaks to your needs. Like really look at their bios, see if they have like the things that, you know, maybe you feel like you need, be it like therapists who work with immigrants, therapists who work with people of particular sexualities or ages, and then reach out to them, let them know a bit about yourself and see if they can accommodate your price point, because many therapists are flexible, especially due to the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you for listing those out. And then I'll just say that you can also find a few free health resources. It's not necessarily speaking to somebody, but at least something that can help you guide through some of the emotions that you might be feeling. You can go on to informedimmigrant.com or inmigrantinformado.com if you're looking for Spanish. But again, thank you everyone so much for staying tuned and joining us in this conversation. Catherine, thank you again so much for taking the time out of your day to have this conversation with us. And I really look forward to continuing to have these conversations with you and finding other opportunities to partner with you all. Again, thank you everyone. Please go follow BAJI. Stay tuned to all of the great work that they're doing.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it.
Okay, thanks everyone. Have a nice night.